That's it. Now, stop the bleeding. Focus. Good. You succeeded. Mastering your breathing. It will open many doors for you. Now, it won't solve everything, but it will help. You will continue to grow stronger.
Thank you.
So, something to add to the Heaven and Earth video. I'm expecting this to be less than an hour, but we're gonna go with it because I'm gonna also add some connections to the volcano. So this video in essence would be like a second part to two different videos and then showing all the different connections. It would be like the second part to the Netherworld series in connection with the Heaven and Earth being separated. And then it would also connect to the video I did on the third dimension, creating, basically the third dimension creating a shadow, and height, basically height, the third dimension creating a shadow. And any of the videos that I recently done on the shadow aspect, you know, and it would also connect with the multiple, more so the collaborations with Bridge of Ra would be the RFID video we did, which was the last collaboration video, and then the video where he was mostly talking about the Afar people, you know, and the connection to the lowest below sea level and the connection with volcanoes. So with connection to the Heaven and Earth aspect, and this right here would just simply just be in essence like an example of quote unquote critical thinking. I ain't gonna say critical thinking, that wouldn't be the spell I would want to cast on it, but more so like being able to question from, you know, what is given. So basically, if the sky is heaven and earth is earth, and the air element, basically Deus, is what separated heaven and earth. Again, I showed the examples with the Sumerian cosmology or mythology with, I want to say is Enlil, you know, separating heaven and earth. I gave the connection with, what's his name in here, Pengu, separating quote unquote heaven and earth. And then in this video, where you see how etymology tells the story, where I broke down again the video Live Now number 31, Divine Timing I think is the one of the names of it, but Live Now number 31 and you'll find it. But I broke down the etymology of divine, and first starting off with Deus, we'll just say starting off with Deus and how Deus is connected to God. And that's also where you get the word theology or theo, which in essence is like, you know, again, like studying quote unquote God, but how Deus is connected to dividing or division and connected to duality. And no coincidence that again, like the air element, you know, the Deus is connected to the sky, and in essence the air element, and that's what's considered to have separated heaven and earth. And if it's separating something, then that means in essence it's creating a duality, you know. And this would be like again a strong yang energy in connection with the I Ching, and a strong yin energy, you know, with the little gaps in the middle, just like a yoni, no gaps, a straight line, like a phallus, you know. And the androgynous nature, you know, that you see in connection with the body, where say for instance a phallus, although it's a straight line, it technically has a vagina at the end of it. In the sense of, you know what I'm saying, what you may call, I don't know the proper name for it, so I'm gonna sound a little ratchet when I say the pee hole. But you know what I'm saying, like that's like a, you know, a yoni on a phallical phallus, you know, so you see like the androgynous nature within our body, you know, but not going too far into that. But again, if the sky is heaven and earth is earth, and the air element is what separated heaven and earth, then that would imply that heaven is either a different type of air or not of the air element. Meaning that if air is what came in between heaven and earth, then heaven, and I feel like this what goes into a lot of the mythologies with like floating, like earth, like basically like land floating in the air in essence. You know, I think of One Piece with Skypiea. I think of King Kong and Godzilla where they went to the Middle Earth and it had the little floating pieces of land, you know what I'm saying? And then on what it is, Fairy Tale with Daedalus, and Daedalus having like the little floating skies. I mean, excuse me, the little floating parts of Earth, where it's basically like the ground floating above a lower ground in essence, you know, so it could be also seen as that. But again, because in most cases, when you think of heaven or you think of the sky, you know, in most cases you would think of air. And what this would also point to is one or two things also. Is like either the heaven is like a earth above the earth, in essence, like a floating earth, or, and that also another connection with that is the cosmology from Norse mythology with the tree. You know what I'm saying? Yggdrasil, and you know you got Midgard, and then you got I forgot. Dang, as much as I don't watch Thor, what's they little? I forgot. Oh, Asgard. You know, Asgard is up high. You know, almost like quote unquote heaven, and you got Midgard in the middle. So heaven would either be like a floating piece of land, or would represent like a thicker type of air, or like a water, you know what I'm saying, or like a firmament, you know. And to go a little bit into that without, I'm gonna get into some other stuff, but because that also goes into the new. But you got like the, you know, so something comes in between. As a matter of fact, using the Pengu analogy, that's a person, it's a head, where they say he raised, you know, quote unquote heaven. And earth. You know, could look at that and ask, so what's in between this? Now, if this once was together, you know, so if this once was one thing and we sandwich it in like that, like if this once was one thing and this is like something opening it up. So imagine it being like, you know, basically, let's see, in the line of separation just for the, you know, the notion of it, but the heaven part, I'll just put the H, heaven, and earth, he, Ea, but heaven and earth, you know, being together, and then something, again, like coming in between it, like this. And so that will also go into, so take a little look at that. That would also go into the Newt and Jeb situation. Matter of fact, I know I drew this kind of wrong, but you get the picture. You know, with this being like, the firmament separating what's out here, then you got the earth. But in essence, this was considered to be, one in essence. Making this connect. So you have those analogies as well. But that's simply all I wanted to add to the heaven and earth perspective, which was real, is that a lot of this stuff is still gonna come together and add up. But as a matter of fact, let me pan the whole board to give a little preview. As a matter of fact, we simply, one of the main things pointing out right now is how it all points to balance. And as above, so below, same thing above in heaven and the same thing below on earth. Chaos above and below. The chaos above would be like the sky, because either if you're looking at it from the water aspect, like beyond the firmament, so to speak, like an atmosphere beyond the firmament, being like chaotic waters. Or if you just look at it within the firmament as the air element. The air is Uranus in Roman mythology, but that's also connected to, because Uranus is born from chaos, and Uranus connected to the sky or the air element. So you got chaos above, and below the chaos is the magma. The molten magma is chaotic. It has no structure. And I done did the crystal videos where I'm like, the magma, in essence, is like the personification of the no thing. It's like the fire and earth representation of the no thing. And matter of fact, I'm going to go back to the tablet on that. And again, you got yin and yang above and below. You got yin energy you got yin and yang energy on your upper part of your body, and you got yin and yang energy on your lower parts. You got parts of your body that operate like a phallus, like a tongue, or your arms and fingers. And the hands kind of embody both, because it's no coincidence that, it's like a phallical aspect. And then you could also make it into a yin aspect as well. Wow, that shows like why the hands is considered so sacred and important. You know what I'm saying? Because it has that androgynous nature embodied in it, and that would also point to the androgynous nature that's sometimes appointed to the Gemini energy. The twins, your left and your right. You know what I'm saying? But again, sky chaotic, magma chaotic. So now this is, just some stuff and connecting the air, airy, fairy. And notice that, and this where it all comes down to, I feel like that is the next level of like understanding the knowledge, is having to remove the good or bad from it to understand the full picture. That doesn't mean be naive. It just means, like, so say for instance how I pointed out the video I did on Hephaestus and the missing moon and the connections with Vulcan and Hephaestus, and in the middle of the word Hephaestus again you see Fae, like the fairy. So you see the fairy connection from a being that's associated, you could say an archetype that's associated with like Earth and being in a volcano, volcano, and I showed you the little fairy connection from the movie Artemis Fowl, and they was in a volcano, and just the etymology and all that kind of, connected. So fairies from the perspective of being, on the earth aspect, and then fairies from a air aspect, because hence why Tinkerbell and fairies are also depicted with, wings. And again, depending on who telling the story, because auspicious, I broke down this too, but auspicious or auspicium is divination by observing the flight of birds. But you got to keep in mind that may be from the perspective, again, like, so in other words, like all like dolphins, whales, fish, anything that comes out of water is not auspicious, So in other words, like whoever turned auspicious from, basically like the divination of observing the flight of birds to like something that's a good omen, so to speak, that's an auspicious omen. That would be people who more associated with the sky aspect. Because you'll see, like, basically, in essence, what you get is the pot calling the kettle black. With the air, again, like the yin and yang energy, in simplicity, yin and yang energy, just, like, you have the natural science of how yin and yang conflicts, and then it turns into a physical representation within cultures and, different types of spirits, different quote unquote principalities, you know what I'm saying? Like, going against each other, and one creates the other. If you ever notice, like whenever you lower the toxic ego when you're talking to somebody, then it kind of automatically deflects. It for one to either, calm their ego down or to deflect their ego. So if you just kind of like on chill and they like trying to fuss with, like say for instance, somebody trying to argue with you and you just deflect it, ultimately, what I'm saying? Like it's going to dissipate, or they're going to just keep trying to, argue, but it's not going. It's not hitting anything because you're not entertaining it, But if one person like duck season, rabbit season, duck season, you know what I'm saying? Then you get that type of energy. But again, you see Anu, the sky father, king of gods, Anubis, Anunnaki. Seeing like Anu, the sky father, then that turned into a connection with, Anubis. And remembering this, that, the reason why you have all these different, like, damn, this is like all kind of shit mixed together. That's what happens when a shape-shifting, when a being has a shape-shifting ability, then you get all of these names of gods. Like he goes by many names and has many different forms. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? And it's not knocking it, because in essence, we are connected to that same energy. We have that same ability to shapeshift. If you got like Gemini and Pisces, like a lot of Gemini and Pisces placements in your chart, and that's the main two that come to mind, because a Pisces could be an actor very well because they could embody different forms. You know, they could genuinely embody and express different, like, you know, archetypes of the zodiac, you know, with it being the last part of the zodiac. And Gemini also represents this too. Hence why in fairy tales, or fairy tale, I should say, the anime, you know, the Gemini spirit is able to shapeshift, you know. And matter of fact, and that quite literally shows the as above, so below aspect too, because the Pisces associated with the depths of the water, so deep in the water, and the air aspect with Gemini, you know, in the air, but both having shape-shifting abilities. But again, Anu, Anubis, Anunnaki, and again, like angels are sky spirits, air spirits, fairy, air, wings. And you got like sky beings connected with the heaven, or Anu, or Anunnaki, ground beings, earth, netter, or nature. Now this is going into the shadow connection with volcanoes. Matter of fact, just quickly, I got Hawaii is a star. In any place with volcano activity, you know, or mountains that was created through volcanoes, in essence, is like a star that connects to all the videos I did on trees, volcanoes, you know, ley lines, stars, you know, how a tree, a star, volcano, in essence, you know, it's like a as above, so below. Like, again, a volcano, like if you look at Earth from a sky view, let's just say, you know, because like if you look from a sky view and everything was completely dark, you would see that like areas where volcanoes would probably look like a star. And especially if they had like big volcanoes underneath the water that was so bright that you could see it, you know what I'm saying, from above. But the volcano being like the Earth version of a star, you know. And the external stars that you see in quote unquote space is like the external aspect of it. And as I say this too, you know, you got like the physical volcano, Earth star, but then you also got like the, again, because I thought of like the body, like within your body, the physical aspect ain't the only aspect that's within your body. You know, you have a subtle body within your body. So although you have a solid spine, you have energies that aren't solid. You know, so in other words, if you cut a body open, you're not going to see chakras. You know, it's like energy fields. You know, so you got that aspect of the inner, you know, earth or inner body as well. But again, like the physical aspect of it is the volcanoes. And again, a volcano is a mixture of the earth and fire energy. You know, magma is the physical representation of the no thing in the form of fire and earth. And right here, giving this example. So first, you know, like imagine like this is the depth of the ocean, like this is the water from the top level. And when you get into the deep, deep ocean, it's dark. Like the sunlight don't penetrate that far. So technically there isn't any shadows being seen in the water that deep. You know, and again, shout out to Bridge of Rafa mentioning that he got videos on his channel. So again, you know, check out his channel as well. And then also he mentioned it in the RFID video that we did. And again, a video on domains and moats. You know, that was a 2-part video, you know. But because right now, like what you're seeing is like, all right, now the parts of my own, inner studies and, and research is putting that together, because again, like, I could have just like, oh, all right, Bridge said that, so I just got to go with it. It's like, all right, he said it, but it had to, you know what I'm saying? Like, I had to align with it in my unique experience, you feel me? So, and really start to see it. But again, and this connects to, again, the anatomy is mythology by law. Anatomy also points to the anatomy of Earth, because as above, so below, our body is also like Earth, in that sense of it. But like in the depths of the ocean, you got like something like this volcano or this opening with magma, it's not protruding out of the ground yet. And so this also points to starting off as a feminine aspect too, because it's like the feminine aspect, the magma, the disorganization aspect, but then as the magma turns into lava, keep flowing out, and then it, hardens, then you end up seeing something like this in that sense, Well, now it went from underneath the ocean to protruding outward, and now, like, the sunlight is in the light, so now the light could hit this, and then a shadow is casted, aka the third dimension. The third dimension is height. The first two dimensions is width and length. The third dimension is when you add height to that. And when you add height to it, now a shadow is cast. And again, you could look at my video that I did on that to, go deeper into that, But you see that also, so this would connect to, you could see like the religious or cosmology, religious, spiritual, cosmology perspectives, quote unquote mythology that comes out of like Ethiopia in particular. In any place that, you have volcanoes or high lands due to volcanoes, so because again, once you have this volcano, then you got the flora and fauna that comes with it. That means like the certain spirits that's around this and within this, and it's certain quote unquote people, or beings in humanoid form that's connected with this energy, so it's like a little ecosystem. And, again, like all your cultures, just everything that's associated with the volcano energy, you kind of see how that comes about. And you see that with this volcano coming out of the ground, you could see the volcano as being one of the things that created a shadow energy on Earth. Because not only did it, in essence, again, because it didn't necessarily create Earth, but what it did do is create a part of Earth where it could connect with this air element. You know what I'm saying? Because all before, like, you got the Earth's still here, in essence. Think of Bikini Bottom. The Earth is still here, but it's underneath water. Not until the Earth came out into connecting with the air and the air spirits, that you create, again, you get the shadow created. So now the shadow, in many perspectives, you see that the fire and earth element, to just not be absolute and try to absolute this message, I'll just say it's one of the things that created a shadow, And if I was like if volcanoes was the only thing I knew about, I would call this volcano God. And I would say that God created, God created the shadow or the double or the mirror or the reflection, So this God created the reflection, created the shadow, created, created the third dimension, our height, and connecting with thermodynamics, where he creates entropy. And basically entropy, I put like a equivalent sign, but entropy in essence is equal to disorder or chaos. Something with low entropy will have a higher level of order in it, and something with high entropy will have a lower level of order. So like crystal structures have low entropy, meaning like it has a low potential of chaos in essence, while liquid has high entropy or a high potential of chaos. Like, this could be chaotic, it could take any type of, you don't know what you could get out of it. And just so happens, like with water in particular, it could turn into, water could actually turn into something with low entropy and be ice. Or, you could boil water and it could just, stay moving. If you see how the bubbles just constantly just had the water moving, and then also it's creating vapor, which is a whole different form as well. And speaking of thermodynamics, I laugh because I like T. Herm. It sounds like somebody out the neighborhood, T. Herm. But T. Hermes or Toth, and Hermes, Toth, all the different, little names and connections. But that would also be connected to, again, like within the name, thermodynamics, Got T. Herm up in there. And up here to kind of segue into entropy a little bit. Let me back up. It takes effort, and that's Mars, heat, work, friction. Friction is yin rubbing on yang, or yang rubbing on yin, either way you want to see it, and that could point to sexual experiences. Or, in essence, if it's unhealthy, it could turn into, a battle or a fight, like a war. It could turn into a war between yin and yang, or it could turn into a blissful connection of yin and yang. It just depends, you feel me? And that's the thing, like, because I put right here, it takes effort to keep the increasing entropy. So it takes heat, or effort to keep or should I say, hold on, it takes effort to keep the increasing entropy organized. But then I had to, bring into awareness down here that, heat technically doesn't have to work for Saturn, or doesn't have to work for organization. And you even see that, like, you work for an organization. That shit crazy. It's not crazy. It's dope to see, it's cool to see how, all of this stuff connect. But you see, Mars or heat or work doesn't have to work for Saturn or the organization. Because technically heat does increase entropy. So heat does increase the possibility of disorder, and it increases the accessibility of different microstates. It's more, you gotta look up thermodynamics and microstates to get more of that, because I'm not about to explain that here. but but basically different microstates within a system, and no coincidence that a system is also in essence an organization. But you get, again, like heat increasing the entropy or disorder and increases the accessibility of different microstates within the system, and you can see this as different potentials or possibilities to take different forms, as I was talking about shapeshifting earlier too, and taking different forms. Again, this heat increases entropy to take different forms. And the heat, the magma, the magma, again, as I talked about with the crystals, is like all the different crystals, amethyst, pyrite, like all the different crystals come from out of, the magma. But it started as no thing. It started as just, as magma, heat and earth, with all kind of potential in it, different, micro states, being able to come out of this. And the micro states would be like the different, crystals you would get after the magma, or AKA lava, cools. And then you also see how obsidian, the crystal obsidian, out of all crystals, would be like the, if he was making this into Osmosis Jones cartoon, basically, personifying these different elements. Obsidian would be like the main descendant, like out of all crystals, obsidian would be like one of the first descendants of, of lava in that essence, because, you got other crystals that farm, but it farms like over years, like it gotta separate, separate from the magma and go into a little pocket and settle for years and years, and just years and years that it take for, again, to get your quartz and all those other types of crystals. But with obsidian, it's coming straight from the source, but not the source of everything, but the source, from this source, And again, you see how the little play on words come in on that level, but it comes straight from the source, straight from that state, and then it spills out. And quite literally, when the lava hits water and cools down rapidly, you get obsidian, And this also kind of somewhat connects to, again, that video I did up on obsidians and meteorites. That's definitely worth checking out. Because again, like moldavite and obsidian does have like a commonality of being a glass, and a commonality of creating like a fast shift, because it's like you go from extreme heat to being cooled down, and then you get this glass. But that obsidian, you see how obsidian is like a direct descendant. In the crystal family, it's a direct descendant of the volcano. While other crystals is kind of like a hybrid, like it breaks away from the source, and then it mixes with a certain gas that was already there, or it mixes with a gas above ground, aka oxygen, but, and not to say oxygen not present within the earth, but it mixes with different gases, or it might reach closer to the earth and, wind get to it, erosion, or, other things, but it gets further away from the magma, and, it mixes with other things. So you have that aspect too. Now, what also connects my video I did on 9 to 5, where I broke down the Pisces etymology. And I do have, again, some of this, because I have some of the notes pictured on the Discord server. But, basically, you eventually get to a part where the etymology of Pisces speaks to distilling spirits, And when you think about spirits, you know, from the perspective of alcohol. You know, when you drink alcohol, in most cases, not the rubbing alcohol, but like again, the ones that's considered spirits, like your cognacs and your gin and all that type of stuff. Like when you got that type of, you know, when you got the different spirits connected on that level, it's hot. You know, because even when you had a like hard liquor, so to speak, you know, again, a hard liquor, quote unquote, has like, you know, like a stronger amount of spirits, you know, a higher proof, so to speak, you know. It's more proof of spirits in hard liquor, but you know, it's hot. Like you drink a shot of some hard liquor, it like burns your throat, you know. It's hot. It got that hot energy, you know. In essence, distilling has to deal with, you know, a process of boiling. Because if you, let's see. You know, you boil this. Let's say you got like this little thing, and it goes into another cup. And let's say like this was like some muddy water, so to speak. Wait, make sure. Like as that steam rises up, you know, you've seen this when you're cooking and you got one of those clear glass tops on top of the pot, and it got like all the little steam or water, but that's like water, you know what I'm saying, from the vapors, and you could collect that in this little pot. But, you know, basically this vapor, let's again saying this was muddy water, this vapor doesn't have the impurities of that mud, you know. Like that vapor is pure, you know, vapor without whatever was sitting in it, you know. And let's just say, like, all right, if it did still have a little of the particles in it, it would be way less compared to what would be in here. Hence why, again, you'd be balling, like, to give an example of it, like, for those of us from Louisiana or the South or anywhere where y'all cook gravy, but you got that roux, got that brown gravy, that thick gravy in that black pot, you know what I'm saying? But yet, it could produce clear water. And you got like chicken necks and all kind of, and I ain't promoting that type of food. You know, I ain't judging it, but I ain't promoting. But you got like all of you got squirrel, raccoon, and deer meat and all that type of stuff in here. But yet the vapor that comes out of it is clear, you know. So that shows, like, again, like the distillation. You know, the distillation process, again, is also, you know, when you think about the zodiac signs. Oh, wait, I did that wrong. Let's just do it like that. But, you know, you got Pisces. I will start from the first house. So Aries, Pisces. So the head, you know, going through the whole body to the feet. But again, it's like, you know, the Pisces. And again, in the etymology of Pisces goes into distilling. And no coincidence, though, that Pisces is like the last zodiac, as if you've been distilled through all, you know, going through the other archetypes. You know, so you see that connection with that. Again, the energy, you know, the more energy, like heat produces more energy potential, you know, so that heat, it turn up the heat. When when the universe turns up the heat on us, you know what I'm saying? We feel like, dang, I gotta make something happen. Gotta take some type of action. You know, gotta put forth some type of effort, you know. And what I didn't bring up, what I didn't point out over here as well, though, as I was saying, it takes effort to keep the increasing entropy organized. You know, basically, it's easier to not clean up and let things get disorganized than it is to keep things organized. You know, like you could just chill and not have to move and, you know, let shit get piled up. You know, again, things get disordered, entropy increases, you know, things all over your room or your house, you know what I'm saying? But then it takes that effort, you know, that heat, that work, or that motion, that action, you know what I'm saying, to pick this up, clean the floor, you know, do all those things. But again, you could take action but not organize things. Like you could completely neglect, like say for instance, everything piling up in your house, but then you take your Mars energy and go use that just to go exercise. You know, you leave your house dirty, but you make sure you go run outside every day. You know, so you could see how, again, like using the Mars energy or that heat or that work doesn't necessarily equate to, you know, being used for organization, you know, necessarily. You know. And again, some of the laws of thermodynamics. Energy is not created or destroyed. And the second law is entropy or disorder in the universe is always increasing. But again, you see why what I was gonna say. You see how, again, with the balance aspect, you see how the Saturn energy can be helpful in certain ways, but to an extreme, it could be like smothering, you know, or like a obsessive parent or obsessive teacher, you know. That was personified in Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, you know, the teacher's name was like Kronos or something like that. And he had an obsession with trying to make sure that, what's his name? Judai. But basically make sure that he was like going through tests and, you know, and having structure to the way that he would duel, you know. Oh, it's Jaden, Judai in the Japanese, but Jaden in the English aspect. But, you know, Jaden was always like being able to win battles without necessarily having to over strategize or overly have an organized game plan. He still was able to, you know, win in essence. And that he represented the Jupiter energy, and the Jupiter energy having to, you know, in essence, in order to like grow, it had to go through a little, you know, face off with the teacher, Kronos, you know, to see why some organization or some aspect of structure is necessary. You feel me? But it's a little connection. You know, and again, seeing how the shadow created by the volcano energy and the you know, the paradox of the volcanic energy, where, you know, like magma, you know, in essence, like, you know, life to some extent, you know, life from a perspective, and more so we'll just say like the Venus aspect of life, which would be more of like plants and flowers and stuff like that. It doesn't thrive in the magma, you know, like in this part of the volcano, but like after the lava comes out and settles, you do have like flora and fauna that comes from the lava. You know, you do have plants and certain animals that live in areas close to a volcano, you know. And again, as Bridge was breaking down like the Afar people and the connection with Ethiopia, you know. Again, gotta give those connections and those shout outs, you know. And he also mentioned something very interesting, but that's for me to go in on a deeper level, but I could just mention it on a surface level where, you know, that also extraterrestrial, you know, could be connected to, you know, beings that's living on a high land or like a mountain, you know, because it's like extraterrestrial, you know, like, you know, you got the earth, you know, underneath the water on that level, you know, and again, like no reflection, no shadow. Then you go into, it grows out of the water and becomes like extraterrestrial, like, cause terra, you know what I'm saying, earth. I did the video on terraforming, multiple videos on terraforming, but, you know, it's like extraterrestrial. It's like extra protruding outward, which would also point to some of the little heaven and earth connections, you know, separation of heaven and earth, and again, the creation of a shadow. Because we talk about the Nomo and Dogon mythology, but like how they talk about like the androgynous, you know, quote unquote fish, or we'll say androgynous aquatic dragon, or androgynous aquatic. We say fish in essence, you know what I'm saying, for lack of a better word, because again, talk about Pisces, you know, and in Vedic astrology is connected to Anatashisha, which is like a naga or a serpent, you know, that sits in the foot, you know, because again, the anatomy is mythology. You know, Pisces represent the feet, represents our ancestors or our foundation or our roots in so many ways, you know. But again, like, you don't have a shadow, so to speak, in these depths. And just like this volcano shining from out of the darkness, because, you know, magma has like that bright color due to it being lit by the fire. But then, you know, the little, you know, the organisms and animals that's like in the depths of the ocean where it's like really, really dark. And not to mention the parts that cameras and certain things don't even go far to, you know. But, you know, they have like light, like their bodies have like lights on it and stuff like that. Again, another connection to, you know, SpongeBob and Bikini Bottom, and then they had Rock Bottom, which was like the depths where like the quote unquote the anglerfish, and again like these beings that kind of had like lights on them and stuff like that, where the sun wouldn't really reach, you know. And if the sun doesn't reach that, I mean that, you know, technically they don't have a shadow, you know, a shadow not really casted, you know, it's not like say for instance, the depths of the ocean not dark because it's a shadow. It's dark because it's just that far away from that, you know, solar light, you know. So you see that connection. How the light, you know, again, like shining within the darkness. Shining because you know, come from out of the dark, or because you're within the dark. But I'm gonna leave it at that and just full circle back to, again, like whole thing with separation of heaven and earth, connected to the air element, you know, in a certain element, which got personified as, again, as different deities. You know, like, oh, this deity, again, Pengu separated heaven from earth, or Enlil separated heaven from earth, or this being, you know, Newton Jeb separated the heavens and the earth, you know what I'm saying? But it gets personified. And that's not to say, again, like, the imagination is real. So even if that was just a part of somebody's imagination, if it was a part of a whole nation of people's imagination, if it's a part of a whole nation of people's imagination, then it becomes something that is real, you know, just off of the strength of that, you feel me? Which to some extent goes into egregors as well, you know, thought forms created by people, groups of people. But lastly, before shifting, and you see all this about heat, and then cold represents, again, that's like the ghostly energy, you know. It's like no spirit. Cold, ice, a piece of ice is unchanging, it's staying the same. A ghost is a apparition, or, like, you know, you could say, yeah, just an apparition that is keeping things the same. Because, again, like, a ghost that's in a haunted house is doing what? It's keeping things the same, because it's like, oh, I still live in this house. Although 6 different families then moved in and out of that house for over 100 years, you know, it's still like, this is my house, you know. So, like, a ghost represents that cold energy, you know, 6th sense, that cold energy, you know, that the little boy will feel before ghosts come through. But, you know, and that connects to the video that I posted on the Holy Ghost. You know, that's gonna connect with that part, but just, you know, showing that polarity. But now it's the vibrate, y'all know what it is. Again, with all of this, you know, it's for the knowledge and awareness without trying to pin something to the extreme positive or extreme negative. You see the positive and negative of all the different things, and you gotta understand how to balance that for yourself by knowing yourself to the fullest, tapping into your natal chart, your numerology, you know what I'm saying, your ancestral connections, and, you know, seeing what aligns best for you. But yeah, now it's a vibrate, y'all know what it is.